and our capacity to make conscious judgments about whether we'll comply with norms. There are also biological things. You know, there's evidence that being in an airplane, that altitude takes away inhibition. So it's one of the reasons that people cry on planes when they watch, I don't know if you ever have this happen to you, but you watch a romantic comedy, some bad movie, and there you are, weeping at something horrible, and you say, why is this? But it's biological now, that altitude actually changes our modes of response. Now that's an interesting thing. People actually study these things, right? But there are other reasons that we become less inhibited, or that we allow things to surface, or that we say, no, I'm not going there. Right? And much of it has to do with intersubjective life, with peers, with norms, with stigma, with all sorts of things. Being too feminine, being not masculine enough, right? Gender norms, all those things.
That's very interesting. So I was thinking about whether I could put it this way. So I was still thinking about the clip about the trans man who had surgery, right? And I was also thinking about maybe this discussion of the instantaneity of, for example, Israel images, and the question of the archive, and also her critique. So
In the catastrophe, I say?
yes.
Yeah.
So I think in your formulation, it seems to me that the images of the trans man's body after his surgery is more like the red dress in Douglas Sirk's film.
Yes.
So when we watch the film, the surgery, we were not really witnessing the events. Right. About a trans man's self-transformation.
Yes.
Right, or self-realization.
Yeah.
It was more like the woman when the images of his body take upon us.
Yes.
Like, so I don't know. I was just trying to think about a way to theorize that moment, because it struck me as so emotional in a way.
Yeah.
Right, we have this trans man who just look at himself.
Yeah.
Not very consciously, actually.
Yeah. Right.
And on the other hand, we have these 5 gay men who acted in the most predictable way.
Yeah.
Possible.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that there is an interesting gap between this, 2 worlds.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah.
Right, and that's where the red dress.
Yes. Yes. The other logic.
Yeah.
Rears its head.
Really the other way.
Yes.
Around.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. I think that part of what's happening in that episode and in that sequence is a convention of reality television where you go inside the operating room.
Right.
It's part of the kind of gross out of body genres. Like if you see an operation, it's gross, right? And so there you are in the room, and they're like cutting a human being up, and that's gross. But we're also sort of interested in like, oh, how does that work? And what are they doing? Like, where do they cut? And what does it really look like? There is this revelation that is totally structured in advance by the grammar of reality shows.
Yeah.
And of surgery on television.
Yeah. And that thing was not shocking at all.
No.
Right.
Right.
And interestingly, you see this flattened,
Yeah. Torso.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously this clip has, it operates in a different logic.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah, and I think that the attribution of his reaction is fully at the level of fantasy. He's not experiencing anything except being groggy and coming out of aesthetic. And you're right, the torso is not shocking. It's still oriented as a human body that is not in any way sort of revelatory. It's a bit stark. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I love that.
Any more questions? 大家有想好了吗？其他同学有问题吗？引进。You have any questions to ask the Villarejo?
But if you would like to ask them and have them translated by Professor Tsai, if that would be more comfortable, you can certainly do that.
你也可以问，用中文问。
那我用中文问好了。就是我有点好奇说，像我们刚刚在看《Queer Eye》的时候，里面有一些 controversy，其实我们对不是非常的熟悉，可是就是我们在看的时候，还是有可能会被触动情感，或者说有哭，或是有其他的 body response。所以，就是我好奇的是，我可以举另外一个例子是，像最近有一部电影叫《返校》，是台湾的电影。那它讲，它其实是一部恐怖片，然后它讲的是关于就是白色恐怖时期。那我会很好奇说，就是就算是一样做出了 body response，但是有体会过当时期的一些可能氛围，或是没有，或是甚至是其他国家的人，那他们为什么会有一样或是不一样的感受或是情感，然后中间的差别会是什么
Okay, the question is that when, for example, she and other students watch the film clips from Queer Eye, often students they were not born in the States, right? Were not educated in that culture, right? But more or less, the mind still has effective responses to this film clips, right? And recently there is this film that is actually an adaptation from a popular computer game, right, called Whiton School. So
Written into school.
yeah,
Detention.
Detention.
Well, it's called detention. And the story of the narrative of this film is actually about the white terror period in Taiwan. Right? But the audience who watch this film, most of the audience who watch this film probably did not experience that
Yeah.
right? So she asks about,
Yeah.
are there differences between, its different effective responses, for people who are affects are supposed to be cultural
Right,
type.
Right.
And that
right,
the question this way or
Right.
more trans-historical.
right.
But also, supposedly effective responses of audiences in different national contexts are conditioned, right, by their social
Absolutely.
situation and
Yeah.
political conditions. So
Yeah.
how do we think of this?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. It's a great question. You can see how many things we have to think about. It's hard, right? So are affects transhistorical? Are affects transhistorical? What do you think? Do those affects transcend history? Was shame the same in the 12th century as in the 17th century, as in the 21st century? Is fear the same in the Middle Ages as the digital world? What do you think? It's not a trick question. It's a real question. What do you think?
This is my own answer.
Yeah.
The feeling is still there, like what triggers them. What triggers them actually can be different.
Yes.
Like I can just take an example from the Friends series.
Yes.
Like in Citizen here, the video English.
Yeah.
In the series, actually, masculinity was like made fun of.
Yes.
And like people were like the guy in there, whenever they discover a side of like queerness, they would be made fun of. And I think that also like kind of effect that it had on the audience.
Yes.
But like in here, the queerness is actually something that affects in a very different way.
Yes.
So I think the feelings, the name, the feeling that you can still have from the what trigger that's different.
Okay, that's a wonderful response. What do you think of that? That the feeling is the same, but the triggers, the social context change over time. What do you think of that? That was very brave and well put. Do you agree? I can wait forever. What do you think? Do you accept that idea? So one theory is that there are a finite number of affects. So a psychoanalytic theorist like Sylvan Tompkins thinks that there are 7. And other people think that there are new affects generated over time. That maybe the experience of shame only arises in a historical context in which there's the particular arrangement of human sexuality that produces a feeling of being looked at by others and judged, and that creates shame, right? So that might have evolved at a certain point historically, right? So there are interesting questions that whole realms of psychology and, I guess it's mostly psychology, study that think about whether affects are transhistorical or produced historically or persist over a particular historical period, right, in some coherent fashion, so that when we say the word fear, we all understand what we're talking about, right? That may not have been the case always. There could have been people who are more endangered and people who are wholly not endangered. And so the idea of fear didn't translate across social groups, right? So they're very interesting. So you're raising this, like, this is a research question for the next several centuries, right? So it's a very, very important question. So are affects transhistorical? Maybe. Are they coherent enough now at this historical moment that we have some shared experience of what they mean? Probably. Right? Then the whole second question, are affects transcultural? Well, that's a big one, right? And how do we talk about the cultural translation of situations that produce affect, right? And that's your question about detention or about watching Queer Eye, right? Are there transcultural, transnational, translinguistic, transregional, right? What crossings are possible, in other words, to understand the production of affect, let's call it that, okay? Rather than talking about a particular situation and affect is separate, but the production of affects, right? How do we understand that across different kinds of borders, right? And that's a very important question, right? Because this isn't legible in some ways, unless you know the history of the American South and the history of American racism. But if you see a guy crying, you know what your feeling is, right? So that, in that sense, the capacity to be effective is just that, it's a capacity. And it may be human or it may not be limited to humans. I don't know. If I hurt, my cat Rocky comes and sits next to me, right? He knows. He knows. I know he knows, right? I don't know how he knows, I don't know what he knows, but he knows, right? So it might not even be human. It may be an animal. That we have this capacity to be affected. And when we don't have it, it's called pathology. Right? When people don't have the capacity to be affected, they are diagnosed, right? As antisocial, as autistic, as all sorts of things. We have names, many, many names, right, for what it means not to have that capacity. Right? So is it transcultural? Probably, sort of. Right? Because there are certain situations that require too much explanation. And we just say, you don't get it. You're not going to get it unless I give you all this context, right? But I teach global cinema, and mostly it works. You teach global cinema, mostly it works, right? And we can fill in the context and give each other the tools to understand the production of affect in particular situations, historical contexts, and so on. But mostly when you see it, you know it. And you're able to respond in some way. So now I have to watch Detention and see. So I think that's a very important question and very, very big. Very, 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 very big question.
You said that this melodrama is investigating into racial differences through queer eyes. Yeah, I think this is an interesting point. But on the other hand, I think you're also the queer theory is universalized to cover racial issues at here. But I remember that for Lee Eldman, in his work Queer Theory and Stating Desire, he emphasized that queer theory teaches us that we are not the same and we don't have to be the same. So when we are affected by the melodrama, by the queer eyes, we may cry, and we may think that we can understand their suffering, their problems, but crying is the outburst of our emotion, and it will not last long. So perhaps we just that we believe we can understand their feeling, that we really understand their feeling.
Right. So that's a wonderful question. You guys are just great. You guys are great. So wonderful questions, wonderful ways of thinking. I really like you all. So the question of sameness and difference is slightly different from the question of empathy. And I would say that one of the things that is helpful about thinking about affect, rather than thinking about psychoanalytic structures of identification or sameness and difference, is that the capacity to be affected is not the same thing as saying that we know the other. It's not the same. If you cry and I feel you, it's not the same as me knowing your stuff, right? It's the capacity to enter into an empathic, affective relation that does not presume to know the other. And in fact, may be prior to that understanding, and may in fact not even lead to understanding, right? That's not the claim. The claim is not that because of my capacity to be affected, I will transcend difference and come to know you. And it might not even be that I will ever come to know you. But the fact that I can feel in your place is the possibility of connection, however tenuous that might be. Right? So I think that what's interesting about the turn to a lot of sort of pre-ethical or pre-political or pre-Adelman be called. I mean, it's sort of, it's not even formed as psychoanalytic structures of identification. It's prior to that. It's a form of simply existing in relationality, which means that I have the capacity to affect you, and you have the capacity to affect me. That's a form of relationality that is not identification, and not the obliteration of difference, and not the assumption of knowing. There's nothing to do, it's not that level, it's a different level. And I can give you the philosophical trajectory, it's very interesting, but it's too much to do here, right? But one version of that is through Emmanuel Levinas, who is a kind of, extreme phenomenologist, right? Who's interested in the face as a landscape for that kind of relationality. That I look at your eyes, you look at my eyes, I see your nose. We have faces that register that have the capacity to illuminate, to smile at one another, to nod, right? We read each other's faces to see what's on those surfaces. We encounter the face and we know that it is another in whom we are invested, with whom we are in relation, just in that appearance of the human face. That's Levinas. Deleuze is about the capacity simply to be affected. It's from Spinoza. It comes all the way through to French post-structuralism. Very interesting stuff to read if you have 10 years that you're not doing anything with. But there's a lineage there that's simply about affect. And that's part of what Professor Tsai is taking you to. So there's a lot there to think about that is prior to this sort of assumption of knowing that comes with paradigms of identification. It's a great question.
I want to ask a question about reality show.
Yeah.
When I watch the show like American Idol,
Yeah.
and sometimes I'm crying for the performance
Yes.
itself, and
Yes.
sometimes I felt myself crying for the audience tears,
Yes.
and that's weird
Yeah.
feeling
Yeah.
because and at that time I feel like I am the one of the audience because I can see the performance and I can see the judges and I
Yes.
can see the other audience, but when I'm moved by the audience tears,
Yes.
I feel like at the same time I am the audience and I am the performer,
Yes.
because it feels like I'm being watched because I'm watching the others' tears.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's my question.
Yeah. Your question is, why is that weird, or why do you feel that way, or?
Yeah, both.
Yeah, both. So I think part of it is the editing of reality television, which is really interesting to think about, because the way that reality television is edited is deliberately to create those flows. And if you think about the way that narrative, classical Hollywood is edited, or it's sort of, let's just call it sort of like 20th century narrative cinema, the editing is usually making a commitment either to showing you things that the characters don't know, which is called unrestricted narration. When you're watching something and you know that the guy doesn't know that there's a bad guy coming after him, and you think, oh God, that guy doesn't know, and this guy's coming out, right? That's unrestricted narration. The character doesn't know, but you know. Or restricted narration ties your experience very tightly to what the character is uncovering. So when you follow a detective, right, Sherlock Holmes or somebody, right, you're learning along with that guy. That's called restricted narration. Reality television has made its gamble, right, on playing with restricted and unrestricted modes by editing you into every conceivable position. That's why it feels weird, right? That's why it's disorienting. Am I the audience? Am I the performer? Am I the judge? Am I watching the person be judged? Am I feeling embarrassed because the performance is so bad and the audience hates it? Am I crying because it was such a triumph, but I know the judge is going to do something better, right? It's that mobility, and it's the editing of reality television that keeps that balance between unrestricted and restricted narration in play. And it's in part why it creates emotional interest and sustains emotional interest over really bad TV, right?